All right. So we are starting this teaching today on the testing of our faith, and we're going to be looking at this in particular from the life of Abraham. We're going to look at a couple of things with him. I think Christians often ask why we face testing in our life. Why is our faith constantly being tested? And when we look at the lives of the great men and women of faith in the Bible, we see that every one of them had gone through great trials and troubles that in their lifetime that threatened or tested their faith. Some endured great suffering for their entire life, while others had their life cut short, being martyred. And it's been true throughout the history of the church. But when we look at those who stood until the end, we have to ask, well, what was it that made them able to stand all of the testing of their faith? So, of course, that's a very complex thing, and we could go through many stories to tell that. Even from Abraham's own life, we could look at that in a whole series of teaching. But we're just going to touch on a couple of things from his life today and see how Abraham responded to the testing of his faith. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 20. Got a few verses up here, but if you have your Bible handy, you might want to go through, have it with you. But I'm going to read all 10 of these verses. It says, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai, his wife, indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was when Abraham came to Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman that she was beautiful. The princes of the Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. And he treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep and oxen, male donkeys, and male and female servants, and female donkeys and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh in his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So here, there's a lot of interesting things going on in the story right now. Of course, it's hard for most Christians to believe that God allows these kinds of trials and tests throughout our life, but that God does allow our faith to be tested in different ways and in throughout our life, because His desire is to strengthen us. And when we go through these tests of our faith and come out on the other side, our faith is strengthened. He allows these things to teach us to think clearly about how God saves and provides for his people, and also to learn how to constantly and consistently trust in God for whatever the circumstances might be. So, the testing of our faith is something that God allows. And here we see this situation with Abram. When the famine struck the land of Canaan, Abram was tested in his faith. And what will he do? How will he respond to this? So now Abram went to Egypt where there was food. It seemed to make sense for him to go there. God sent a famine to the land of Canaan where Abram had just arrived. Now, why would God do such a thing? Why would God allow a famine in the land to which God had just called Abram? So Abram answered God's call to leave Ur and go to the land of promise. In other words, God spoke to Abram and he gave them the commandment. In as we saw in Genesis chapter 12, in the first three verses of Genesis chapter 12, it says that God spoke to Abram and promised him, I will bless you, I will prosper you, I will prosper those who, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you, and all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. So in that situation, Abram packed up and left for the land of Canaan, to the place that God would show him. And then immediately what happens? There's a famine. What is Abram going to do? It says in here, in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 and 9, in Hebrews chapter 11, 8, 9, that faith chapter, it says, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out of the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise as a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. So this was obviously a test of Abram's faith. And Abram passed that test because he obeyed God. He went out of the place where his home was, and he went to a place that he didn't know. He had no idea what the future would be. He didn't question God's leading when he was faced with this uncertain future in going to Canaan. He had no idea how would he survive as a foreigner in a foreign land. And so, like many believers, Abraham found that when he determined to follow God, he immediately encountered great obstacles. And so this is the first obstacle, the first challenge to that faith, to his faith that he received. He found himself in the midst of a famine that threatened his flocks and herds. And if the famine persisted, Abraham could lose everything, because the flocks and herds would die out without grass and without water. So Abram's faced with a situation of disaster. He came, he believed God, he obeyed God, he finds himself in Canaan, and now he finds everything threatened. Everything that God promised him is now threatened. And so he tried to second guess what God was doing. And although the Lord promised to bless him, he didn't seek God's answer when he fled to Egypt. It does not say in the text anywhere that God told Abram to go to Egypt. It doesn't say anywhere that Abram prayed and asked God, what am I supposed to do here? Do you want me to go to Egypt or anything like that? Abram just saw what he thought was the right path to take, and he packed up and went down to Egypt. He fled to Egypt, where the famine had not struck. Now here, you see how this is obvious a test from God for Abram. Abram may have thought that he was only using the intelligence God gave him when he moved temporarily to Egypt to wait for new prospects in the Promised Land. But there are several important questions we need to ask at this point. And of course, first, did God instruct Abram to leave Canaan and go to Egypt the way he had instructed him to leave Ur and go to Canaan? Now he's in Canaan, and the question is there any indication that God had instructed Abram to go to Egypt? No. Did Abram ask God's direction to move to Egypt? No. When he arrived in Egypt, did Abram believe in a way, or behave in a way that reflected his faith in God's promises to prosper and protect him. No, he did not act in a faithful manner. Did Abram's actions jeopardize the promised seed through Abram and Sarai? Yes, the promise of God that he would receive, that the nations of the earth would be blessed through him and through his seed, is being threatened here. So Abram did not act at all in a manner that was of faith in the promises of God. So God may have sent Abraham down to Egypt anyway, even if Abraham may have sought God's plan and purpose, and maybe God would have sent him down to Egypt, but we don't know that. We'll never know for sure. We'll never know for sure because Abraham made the best decision. He may have made the best decision to go to Egypt and wait for the end of the famine, at least by human standards, by the human way of doing things. But when God tests us, it's not always to see if we will make the smart choice. Actions that seem clever by human standards do not always prevent us from making bad decisions along the way. And so here we see how Abram had failed to do what was truly wise in the Lord's sight. Like with Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. So here we see that in having trusted God and moved to Canaan, Abram immediately followed his own wisdom, and instead of trusting God to direct his path, and so he ended up in more trouble, fearing for his own life. He made a bad choice. He made a bad decision when he asked Sarai to tell a half truth that she was his sister. And of course, it was in his mind, he may have justified it by the fact that she was his half sister, but she was also his wife, and a half truth is the same thing as a lie. So he had made a bad choice. He made a bad decision. We can see by his actions he was not acting in faith. So Abram's intent, of course, was to deceive the Egyptians. And he feared that if they knew the truth, they would kill him to get Sarai. Again, where's his faith in all of that? Where's his faith that in the promise of God to him? So he of course he saw that she was would have been a desirable addition to Pharaoh's harem because of Abram's wealth and her beauty. But as Sarai's brother, of course, he was reasoning that he would have been given a place of honor in Pharaoh's household. And so as her husband, however, Abram feared that his life would be in danger because at that time, powerful rulers often took what they wanted. And Sarai would have been a prize to the Pharaoh's harem because but she could not enter in as a wife or even go into his harem unless Abram was out of the way, if he was honest about being Sarai's husband. So this was all a test. This is how, what so often happens when we don't seek God's wisdom and God's will and God's plan for our life. We can end up in following our own way that seems right to us and seems logical or reasonable to us, and then we end up making bad choices, bad decision, and a lack of faith only leads in one point or another to sin. If we have to lie or cheat in order to get our way, then obviously our faith has failed. And so it is the same way with Abram. Abram failed an important test of faith and the promises of God. God had promised him to prosper him. He had promised him that he would become a great nation, that his offspring would become a great nation. And then here he is failing the first test of that word that God had promised him. So and of course we see so often in the lives of so many people, so many Christians, that if you don't trust God, it will lead you to sin. Somebody who doesn't trust God to provide for them might turn to stealing, because if they're afraid that they won't have food or they won't be able to have provision. But God has promised us that He will take care of us. He will provide for us. He will take care of our needs, our food, our shelter, our clothing, when we put our trust in Him. When we seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, He will provide the basics that we need. He didn't never promised us that we live in palaces, that we live in a Pharaoh's mansion. He didn't promise us that, but He did say that He'd take care of us. And so when Abraham's faith failed, he believed he would have to lie to protect himself. And Abraham's problem only multiplied because of that. And the test of his faith became a real trial for him. Now, because God had given Abram the promise that he had, it was God's plan to bail Abram out of the situation. And He did that through the plague upon Pharaoh's household. And we're not told how Pharaoh finds out that Sarai is not his sister, but his wife. But when Pharaoh finds that out, I mean, he could have killed Abraham anyway for what he had done. He could have turned Abraham out and stripped everything that he had from him. He could have sent him and Sarah out with hardly a stitch of clothes on their back, but he didn't. And that was because God's favor was upon him. And again, God kept His promise. He had said that I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you, and all the nations of the earth will be blessed through you. So God kept His promise, even though Abraham failed this test of faith. And more than once, of course, as we read the whole story of Abraham and read through all of the chapters regarding Abraham, we see that more than once he failed the test of faith, but through every trial, every test, his faith in God only grew. And that's the same for us. We often fail those tests of our faith. We often fall in our belief that God's going to take care of us no matter what. As long as we are faithful to God and seek Him first and put our faith and trust in Him, He has promised to take care of us. And yet, so often our faith will fail us, and when it's challenged, when it's put to the test. And so we always have to be very careful and cautious, and recognizing the fact that God is constantly continually allowing our faith to be tested. And we see throughout Abraham's life, throughout his experiences with God, that his faith is constantly being tested. But through each testing, Abraham's faith in God is increased. And by the end of his lifetime, or near the end of his lifetime, when we read in Genesis chapter 22, when we turn to Genesis chapter 22, here is where Abraham's faith is proven, where you can see that near the end of his time on the earth here, that Abraham's faith has now become so strong that he faces this ultimate test of his life. And of course, we're all familiar with this passage of Scripture where Abraham, God says, "Take your son, the son of the promise, and take him to the mountaintop and offer him as a burnt offering." And of course, this all seems very bizarre. I mean, what is God doing here? How is God? Why is God telling him to take his own son, Isaac, the son of the promise, and sending him to offer him as a sacrifice? It doesn't make much sense at all. And yet, that's what God has been doing. And so Of course, we know all remembering the story, what happens with all of that as he takes his son and he binds him and he places him on the altar and he prepares to take the knife to him to kill him and in ahead of being offered as a burnt offering to the Lord. And so there Abraham sends God sends his angel to speak to Abraham and says, "Oh, wait, don't do this." And God provides the sacrificial animal, the ram, and he offers it up and as a substitute for his son. Of course, we look back on this, and we're able to look back on this after Jesus, after the Son of God being offered as the sacrifice once and for all. And oh yeah, it all makes perfect sense to us now. Before Jesus came along, this was a great mystery to the Jews. What was God doing here? Why was God testing Abraham's faith in such a dramatic way? And what was God all about here? And so we see on the one hand, yes, it was the ultimate test of Abraham's faith. And we can see that he had passed that test of faith. But it wasn't really until after Jesus that people began to be able to make sense of this and understand what God was doing. So the question comes to us, why does God test our faith? Why is our faith constantly being tested? So when God tests us, he sends us tests not to make us or to break us somehow, to make us spiritually superior when we pass the test, or if we pass the test, or to break us and destroy us and make us feel bad and feel guilty when we fail. But God tested Abraham again, not to trip him up and watch him fail, but to deepen his capacity to obey God, to develop his character, a godly character in him. And in the same way, God tests us and gives us tests in our faith for the same reasons. That God wants us to become strong and deeper in our capacity to trust him, and he wants us to be able to develop that godly character that comes through the testing of our faith. God did not send Abraham to the mountain to offer his son Isaac before Abraham had passed many tests before this great one came along. So you see how God is developing Abraham and building him up and making him strong and releasing all the impurities from his life until he is ready to face this ultimate test and trial. So, again, God tests us the way the goldsmith tests the purity of gold. The fires of the refiner's fire, they extract the ore, the base materials, and they extract out the precious metals. So God refines us through very difficult circumstances in our lives. And when we're going through these times when our faith is being tested to the max, again, when you're going through it's hard to rejoice. I mean, when you're in trouble and things are going badly in your life and you feel like, this is the worst situation I can be in right now, and you're asking whether or not God is really helping you. Is God really with you? Was God really able to keep his promises to you? Will you fall down and be crushed by whatever this situation you're facing? It's hard when you're feeling that way to rejoice and thank God for the test, but yet that's part of the testing, is we understand that God is building our character in this. He's building our faith and making our faith so much stronger so that we'll be able to face even more difficult things in the road ahead of us. And of course, it's only human nature. We're all the same way. I'm like that. When my faith is being tested and I'm going through the test, it's easy for me to complain, uh, or it becomes, it's difficult, to say, okay, step back and say, God is really purifying us, and He's really trying to develop a Christ-like character in me as I'm going through this test. And so, but that's when God allows these tests. He tests us. It brings our real priorities out into the open. Do you really trust God? Do you really believe in God? Are you putting, we so often we say we believe, we're believers, but when it comes down to the trials in this lifetime that we face, will our faith stand? So, of course, God, did God really ask Abraham to perform a human sacrifice? Of course, we know pagans practice human sacrifice, and God had condemned strongly this terrible sin. Um, but so it must mean, God, this is important, that God is doing something here. I mean, if He's commanding something like this from Abraham, this is a serious thing. There's something more that's just going on here than what's on the surface. And again, as I said, certainly God didn't want Isaac to die, and he wanted Abraham to face a test in such a way that it would be clear to Abraham that Abraham loved God more than he loved the promises of God. Um, and again, for so many centuries, this was a mystery. What was going on here, and what was God trying to do? What was He saying? And it's, again, not until God offers His own Son as a substitute for sin that we fully begin to understand what God was speaking here, and why God had this particular test of faith. And it also understands that Abraham had reached this point, like when Jesus said in Luke 14, verses 26 and 27, Jesus had said it in those things, that unless, He said, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. And so here we see Abraham facing that test of, of who do you love more? Do you love the things of this world more? Do you love your family more? Do you love your friends more? Do you love is there something that you love more than God? And to be a true follower of Jesus, to really be one who can stand in every measure of our faith, we have to put God ahead of everything. And that's what Jesus was talking about. It's the extreme kind of faith that God is calling upon us to follow. And so God tested Abraham really in the same way that He tests all of us. The purpose of testing is to strengthen our character, and it's also to deepen our commitment to God. Because when our faith is tested and we go through that test and we trust God in that situation, it deepens our commitment to Him, and to trust His perfect timing in all things. God has promised us that He will work all things together for good for those who are called according to His purposes. And sometimes it's hard, when that's tested. Is God really going to work this situation out for our best? It doesn't look like it at the time, but we have to trust that God's going to work it out in His perfect timing. And also, we must believe His word, to believe that what God has spoken. Did God not say that He would take care of us? Did He not say, don't worry about what you will eat or what you will drink or what you will wear? Did He not say that He would take care of us like the lilies of the field and the birds of the air? Did He not say that if we put our trust in Him, He will protect us, and He will take care of us? So we have to, when we go through these tests of our faith, it proves God's word. And when we come through that and God provides in the situation, then we believe his word. And so all of these tests are done for these purposes. And of course, we see many, many Old Testament examples of men and women of God who were tested by God, and sometimes in the worst of circumstances. We can read many, many stories throughout the scriptures that will encourage us to see how those who had faith and those who believed and those who acted on that faith, who stepped out in faith, believing God and trusting in his word, how God worked those circumstances for their good, and how those who did not trust God and failed the test, how they suffered for that. So we can learn from all of their experiences, whether we pass or fail the test. We learn from our own experiences as well. Testing is used by the Lord to bring out our true character. So God tested prophets and priests and kings to see if they would remain loyal to him. Testing shows what we are really like, and will show us our own shortcomings, and the attitudes of our heart are often revealed in the midst of that testing of a faith. In times of success, it's easy to live a good life. When following God and we get we get prosperity and all the good things of this life and all the good things of this world. Who wouldn't follow Jesus under such circumstances? But when the times of testing and trouble come, when that which we rely on in this world, when those things are taken from us, the question is, how do we respond to that? When pressure and trouble or pain comes to our life, it will quickly remove our thin veneer of goodness or strength or even our faith, or what we say we believe. We say, oh yeah, I'm a believer, yeah, I believe God's gonna take care of us, and then we go through these times of trouble, and that's when we really find out what we truly believe. So what are you like under pressure or when everything is going wrong? Do you give in? Do you pull the covers up over your head and cry? Or do you turn to God and trust in God to work out the situation? And those who are consistently in touch with God don't have to worry about what pressure may reveal about them. When we truly trust God and we're in touch with God and we're walking in faith with God and truth in God, when all these things are taking place with God, we don't have to worry about what that kind of pressures we will face. That we know that God will take care of us. We will get through it, and we can trust in God in these situations. So again, I'm going to close with this psalm here, because we can use, it helps us to know that we can trust God in these situations. We can trust God that He'll take care of our situation that we're in. When David went through many tests of his faith, he said, "In the Lord I put my trust. How can you say to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow on the string, that they may shoot secretly at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what will the righteous do? Or what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. And the Lord tests the righteous, but the wicked one who loves violence, his soul hates. Upon the wicked he will rain coals, fire and brimstone and burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness. His countenance beholds the upright. And so by faith, when we are facing these trials, that's when we hold high our shield of faith. And that's when we trust in God all the more. It's so important that we know how to trust God in these situations and these things. And so uh, as Hebrews chapter 11 reminds us of these many people of great faith who went through also great trials and testing of their faith. So again, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, he offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped leaning on top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of departure of the children of Israel and gave instruction concerning his bones. So by faith, we are commended before God. And by faith, our faith will be tested, but our faith will be made strong in each of those testings that God has for us. Amen.